Hi, my sweet friends, and welcome back to Crochet Every Day with Judy. We are reading again from A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court, starting with Chapter 15, Sandy's Tale. "And so I'm proprietor of some knights," said I as we rode off. "Who would ever have supposed that I should live to list up assets of that sort? I shan't know what to do with them unless I raffle them off. How many of them are there, Sandy?" "7, please you, sir, and their squires." "It is a good haul. Who are they? Where do they hang out?" "Where do they hang out?" "Yes, where do they live?" "Ah, I understand thee not. That will I tell eftsoons." Then she said musingly and softly, turning the words daintily over her tongue, "Hang they out, where do they hang out? Right so, where do they hang out? Of a truth, the phrase hath a fair and winsome grace, and is prettily worded withal. I will repeat it anon and anon in mine idleness, whereby I may peradventure learn it. Where do they hang out? Even so, already it falleth trippingly from my tongue, and forasmuch as— Don't forget the cowboys, Sandy." "Cowboys?" "Yes, the knights, you know. You were going to tell me about them a while back, you remember. Figuratively speaking, game's called." "Game? Yes. Go to the bat. Get to work on your statistics, and don't burn so much kindling getting your fire started. Tell me about the knights." "I will well, and lightly will begin. So they two departed and rode into a great forest, and— Great Scott! You see, I recognized my mistake at once. I had set her works a-going. It was my own fault. She would be 30 days getting down to those facts, and she generally began without a preface and finished without a result. If you interrupted her, she would either go right along without noticing or answer with a couple of words and go back and say the sentence over again. So interruptions only did harm, and yet I had to interrupt, and interrupt pretty frequently, too, in order to save my life. A person would die if he let her monotony drip on him right along all day. "Great Scott," I said in my distress. She went right back and began over again. "So they two departed and rode into a great forest, and—" "Which two?" "Sir Gawain and Sir Uwaine. And so they came to an abbey of monks, and they were well lodged. So on the morn they heard their masses in the abbey, and so they rode forth till they came to a great forest. Then was Sir Gawain ware in a valley by a turret of 12 fair damsels, and 2 knights armed on great horses, and the damsels went to and fro by a tree. And then was Sir Gawain ware how there hung a white shield on that tree, and ever as the damsels came by it, they spit upon it, and some threw mire upon the shield. Now, if I hadn't seen the like myself in this country, Sandy, I wouldn't believe it, but I've seen it, and I can just see those creatures now parading before that shield and acting like that. The women here do certainly act like all possessed. Yes, and I mean your best, too, society's very choicest brands. The humblest hello girl along 10,000 miles of wire could teach gentleness, patience, modesty, manners to the highest duchess in Arthur's land." "Hello girl? Yes, but don't you ask me to explain. It's a new kind of a girl. They don't have them here. One often speaks sharply to them when they are not at the least in fault, and he can't get over feeling sorry for it and ashamed of himself in 1,300 years. It's such shabby mean conduct, and so unprovoked. The fact is, no gentleman ever does it, though I myself, if I've got to confess. Peradventure she— Never mind her. I tell you I couldn't ever explain her so you would understand." "Even so be it, sith ye are so minded." Then Sir Gawain and Sir Uwaine went and saluted them, and asked them why they did that despite to the shield. "Sirs," said the damsels, "we shall tell you. There is a knight in this country that owneth this white shield, and he is a passing good man of his hands. But he hateth all ladies and gentlewomen, and therefore we do all this despite to the shield." "I will say you," said Sir Gawain, "it beseemeth evil a good knight to despise all ladies and gentlewomen. And peradventure, though he hate you, he hath some cause, and peradventure he loveth in some other places ladies and gentlewomen, and to be loved again, and he such a man of prowess as ye speak of." "Yes, man of prowess. Yes, that is the man to please them, Sandy. Man of brains. That is a thing they never think of. Tom Sayers, John Heenan, John L. Sullivan. Pity but you could be here. You would have your legs under the round table and a sir in front of your names within the 24 hours, and you could bring about a new distribution of the married princesses and duchesses of the court in another 24. The fact is, it is just a sort of polished-up court of Comanches, and there isn't a squaw in it who doesn't stand ready at the dropping of a hat to desert to the buck with the biggest string of scalps at his belt." "And he be such a man of prowess as ye speak of," said Sir Gawain. "Now what is his name?" "Sir," said they, "his name is Marhaus, the king's son of Ireland." "Son of the King of Ireland, you mean. The other form doesn't mean anything. And look out and hold on tight now. We must jump this gully. There, we are all right now. This horse belongs in the circus. He is born before his time." "I know him well," said Sir Uwaine. "He is passing good knight as any is on live." "On live. If you've got a fault in the world, Sandy, it is that you are a shade too archaic. But it isn't any matter. For I saw him once proved at a just, where many knights were gathered, and that time there might no man withstand him. As, said Sir Gawaine, damsels, methinketh ye are to blame, for it is to suppose he that hung that shield there will not be long therefrom, and then may those knights match him on horseback, and that is more your worship than thus, for I will abide no longer to see a knight's shield dishonored. And therewith Sir Uwaine and Sir Gawaine departed a little from them, and then were they where Sir Marhaus came riding on a great horse straight toward them. And when the 12 damsels saw Sir Marhaus, they fled into the turret as they were wild, so that some of them fell by the way. Then the one of the knights of the tower dressed his shield and said on high, Sir Marhaus, defend thee. And so they ran together, that the knight brake his spear on Marhaus, and Sir Marhaus smote him so hard that he brake his neck and the horse's back. Well, that is just the trouble about this state of things. It ruins so many horses. That saw the other knight of the turret and dressed him toward Marhaus, and they went so eagerly together that the knight of the turret was soon smitten down, horse and man stark dead. Another horse gone. I tell you, it is a custom that ought to be broken up. I don't see how people with any feeling can applaud and support it. So these two knights came together with great random. I saw that I had been asleep and missed a chapter, but I didn't say anything. I judged that the Irish knight was in trouble with the visitors by this time, and this turned out to be the case. That Sir Uwaine smote Sir Marhaus, that his spear brast in pieces on the shield, and Sir Marhaus smote him so sore that horse and man he bare to the earth, and hurt Sir Uwaine on the left side. The truth is, Alisanda, the archaics are a little too simple, the vocabulary is too limited, and so, by consequence, descriptions suffer in the matter of variety. They run too much to level Saharas of fact, and not enough to picturesque detail. This throws about them a certain air of the monotonous. In fact, the fights are all alike. A couple of people come together with great random. Random is a good word, and so is exegesis, for that matter, and so is holocaust, and defalcation, and usufruct, and 100 others. But land, a body ought to discriminate. They come together with great random, and a spear is brast, and one party break his shield, and the other one goes down, horse and man, over his horsetail, and break his neck, and then the next candidate comes randoming in, and brast his spear, and the other man brast his shield, and down he goes, horse and man, over his horsetail, and break his neck, and then there's another elected, and another, and still another, till the material is all used up. And when you come to figure up results, you can't tell one fight from another, nor who whipped, and as a picture of living, raging, roaring battles show. Why, it's pale and noiseless, just ghosts scuffling in a fog. Dear me, what would this barren vocabulary get out of the mightiest spectacle? The burning of Rome in Nero's time, for instance? Why, it would merely say, town burned down, no insurance, boy brast a window, fireman break his neck. Why, that ain't a picture. It was a good deal of a lecture, I thought, but it didn't disturb Sandy, didn't turn a feather. Her seam stored steadily up again the minute I took off the lid. Then Sir Marhaus turned his horse and rode toward Gawaine with his spear, and when Sir Gawaine saw that, he dressed his shield, and they avented their spears, and they came together with all the might of their horses, that either knight smote other so hard in the midst of their shield, but Sir Gawaine's spear brake. I knew it would. But Sir Marhaus's spear held, and therewith Sir Gawaine and his horse rushed down to the earth, just so, and brake his neck. And lightly Sir Gawaine rose upon his feet, and pulled out his sword, and dressed him toward Sir Marhaus on foot. And therewith either came unto other eagerly, and smote together with their swords, that their shields flew in cantels, and they bruised their helms and their hauberks, and wounded either other. But Sir Gawaine, fro it past 9 of the clock, waxed by the space of 3 hours ever stronger and stronger, and thrice his might was increased. All this espied Sir Marhaus, and had great wonder how his might increased, and so they wounded other passing sore. And then when it was come noon, the pelting sing-song of it carried me forward to scenes and sounds of my boyhood days. New Haven, 10 minutes for refreshments. Conductor'll strike the gong bell 2 minutes before train leaves. Passengers for the shoreline, please take seats on the rear car. This car don't go no further. Ah, please, orange, bananas, sandwiches, popcorn. And waxed past noon, and drew toward evensong. Sir Gawaine's strength feebled, and waxed passing faint, that unnethes he might dure any longer. And Sir Marhaus was then bigger and bigger, which strained his armor, of course, and yet little would one of these people mind a small thing like that. And so, Sir Knight, said Sir Marhaus, I have well felt that ye are a passing good knight, and a marvellous man of might, as ever I felt any while it lasteth, and our quarrels are not great, and therefore it were a pity to do you hurt, for I feel you are passing feeble. Ah, said Sir Gawaine, gentle knight, ye say the word that I should say. And therewith they took off their helms, and either kissed other, and there they swore together, either to love other as brethren. But I lost the thread there, and dozed off to slumber, thinking about what a pity it was that men with such superb strength enabling them to stand up cased in cruelly burdensome iron and drenched with perspiration, and hack and batter and bang each other for 6 hours on a stretch, should not have been born at a time when they could put it to some useful purpose. Take a jackass, for instance. A jackass has that kind of strength and puts it to a useful purpose, and is valuable to this world because he is a jackass. But a nobleman is not valuable because he is a jackass. It is a mixture that is always ineffectual and should never have been attempted in the first place. And yet, once you start a mistake, the trouble is done, and you never know what is going to come of it. When I came to myself again and began to listen, I perceived that I had lost another chapter, and that Alisanda had wandered a long way off with her people. And so they rode and came into a deep valley full of strength, and puts it to a useful purpose. And as valuable above thereby was the head of the stream, a fair fountain, and 3 damsels sitting thereby. In this country, said Sir Marhaus, came never knight since it was christened, but he found strange adventures. This is not good form, Alisanda. Sir Marhaus, the king's son of Ireland, talks like all the rest. You ought to give him a brogue, or at least a characteristic expletive. By this means one would recognize him as soon as he spoke without his ever being named. It is a common literary device with the great authors. You should make him say, in this country, be jabers, came never knight since it was christened, but he found strange adventures, be jabers. You see how much better that sounds. Came never knight, but he found strange adventures, be jabers. Of a truth it doth indeed, fair lord, albeit 'tis passing hard to say, though peradventure that will not tarry, but better speed with usage. And then they rode to the damsels, and either saluted other, and the eldest had a garland of gold about her head, and she was 60 winter of age or more. The damsel was? Even so, dear lord, and her hair was white under the garland. Celluloid teeth, $9 a set, as like as not, the loose fit kind that go up and down like a portcullis when you eat and fall out when you laugh. The second damsel was of 30 winter of age, with the circlet of gold about her head. The third damsel was but 15 year of age. Billows of thought came rolling over my soul, and the voice faded out of my hearing. 15. Break, my heart, oh, my lost darling. Just her age, who was so gentle and lovely and all the world to me, and whom I shall never see again. How the thought of her carries me back over wide seas of memory to a vague, dim time, a happy time, so many, many centuries hence, when I used to wake in the soft summer mornings out of sweet dreams of her and say, hello, Central, just to hear her dear voice come melting back to me with a hello, Hank. That was music of the spheres to my enchanted ear. She got $3 a week, but she was worth it. I could not follow Alisanda's further explanation of who our captured knights were now. I mean, in case she should ever get to explaining who they were. My interest was gone, my thoughts were far away and sad. By fitful glimpses of the drifting tale caught here and there and now and then, I merely noted in a vague way that each of these 3 knights took one of these 3 damsels up behind him on his horse, and one rode north, another east, the other south, to seek adventures, and meet again and lie after year and day, and without baggage. It was of a piece with the general simplicity of the country. The sun was now setting. It was about 3 in the afternoon when Alisanda had begun to tell me who the cowboys were, so she had made pretty good progress with it for her. She would arrive some time or other, no doubt, but she was not a person who could be hurried. We were approaching a castle which stood on high ground, a huge, strong, venerable structure, whose gray towers and battlements were charmingly draped with ivy, and whose whole majestic mass was drenched with splendors flung from the sinking sun. It was the largest castle we had seen, and so I thought it might be the one we were after, but Sandy said no. She did not know who owned it. She said she had passed it without calling when she went down to Camelot. Chapter 16. Morgan Le Fay. If knights errant were to be believed, not all castles were desirable places to seek hospitality in. As a matter of fact, knights errant were not persons to be believed, that is, measured by modern standards of veracity. Yet measured by the standards of their own time and scaled accordingly, you got the truth. It was very simple. You discounted a statement 97%. The rest was fact. Now, after making this allowance, the truth remained that if I could find out something about a castle before ringing the doorbell, hailing the warders, it was the sensible thing to do. So I was pleased when I saw in the distance a horseman making the bottom turn of the road that wound down from this castle. As we approached each other, I saw that he wore a plumed helmet and seemed to be otherwise clothed in steel, but bore a curious addition also, a stiff, square garment like a herald's tabard. However, I had to smile at my own forgetfulness when I got nearer and read this sign on his tabard: Persimmon's soap, all the prime dawn use it. That was a little idea of my own, and had several wholesome purposes in view toward the civilizing and uplifting of this nation. In the first place, it was a furtive underhand blow at the nonsense of knight errantry, though nobody suspected that but me. I had started a number of these people out. excuse me, the bravest knights I could get, each sandwiched, excuse me, each sandwiched between bulletin boards bearing one device or another. And I judged that by and by, when they got to be numerous enough, they would begin to look ridiculous. And then even the steel-clad ass that hadn't any board would himself begin to look ridiculous because he was out of the fashion. Excuse me. Secondly, these missionaries would gradually, and without creating suspicion or exciting alarm, introduce a rudimentary cleanliness among the nobility, and from them it would work down to the people if the priests could be kept quiet. This would undermine the church. Would be a step toward that. Next, education. Next, freedom. And then she would begin to crumble. It being my conviction that any established church is an established crime, an established slave pen, I had no scruples, but was willing to assail it in any way or with any weapon that promised to hurt it. Why, in my own former day, in remote centuries not yet stirring in the womb of time, there were old Englishmen who imagined that they had been born in a free country with the Corporation Act and the test still in force in it, timbers propped against men's liberties and dishonored consciences to shore up an established anachronism with. My missionaries were taught to spell out the gift signs on their tabards. The showy gilding was a neat idea. I could have got the king to wear a bulletin board for the sake of that barbaric splendor. They were to spell out these signs and then explain to the lords and ladies what soap was, and if the lords and ladies were afraid of it, get them to try it on a dog. The missionary's next move was to get the family together and try it on himself. He was to stop at no experiment, however desperate, that could convince the nobility that soap was harmless. If any final doubt remained, he must catch a hermit. The woods were full of them. Saints, they called themselves, and saints they were believed to be. They were unspeakably holy and worked miracles, and everybody stood in awe of them. If a hermit could survive a wash and that failed to convince a duke, give him up, let him alone. Whenever my missionaries overcame a knight errant on the road, they washed him, and when he got well, they swore him to go and get a bulletin board and disseminate soap and civilization the rest of his days. As a consequence, the workers in the field were increasing by degrees, and the reform was steadily spreading. My soap factory felt the strain early. At first I had only 2 hands, but before I had left home I was already employing 15 and running night and day, and the atmospheric result was getting so pronounced that the king went sort of fainting and gasping around, and said he did not believe he could stand it much longer, and Sir Launcelot got so that he did hardly anything but walk up and down the roof and swear, although I told him it was worse up there than anywhere else. But he said he wanted plenty of air, and he was always complaining that a palace was no place for a soap factory anyway, and said if a man was to start one in his house, he would be damned if he wouldn't strangle him. There were ladies present, too, but much these people ever cared for that. They would swear before children if the wind was their way when the factory was going. This missionary knight's name was La Cote Male Tail, and he said that this castle was the abode of Morgan le Fay, sister of King Arthur, and wife of King Uriens, monarch of a realm about as big as the District of Columbia. You could stand in the middle of it and throw bricks into the next kingdom. Kings and kingdoms were as thick in Britain as they had been in Little Palestine in Joshua's time, when people had to sleep with their knees pulled up because they couldn't stretch out without a passport. La Cote was much depressed, for he had scored here the worst failure of his campaign. He had not worked off a cake, yet he had tried all the tricks of the trade, even to the washing of a hermit, but the hermit died. This was indeed a bad failure, for this animal would now be dubbed a martyr, and would take his place among the saints of the Roman calendar. Thus made he his moan, this poor Sir La Cote Male Tail, and sorrowed passing sore. And so my heart bled for him, and I was moved to comfort and stay him. Wherefore I said, "Forbear to grieve, fair knight, for this is not a defeat. We have brains, you and I, and for such as have brains there are no defeats, but only victories. Observe how we will turn this seeming disaster into an advertisement for our soap, and the biggest one to draw that was ever thought of, an advertisement that will transform that Mount Washington defeat into a Matterhorn victory. We will put on your bulletin board, patronized by the elect. How does that strike you?" "Verily, it is wonderfully bethought." Well, a body is bound to admit that for just a modest little one-line ad, it's a corker. So the poor colporteur's griefs vanished away. He was a brave fellow and had done mighty feats of arms in his time. His chief celebrity rested upon the events of an excursion like this one of mine, which he had once made with a damsel named Maledicent, who was as handy with her tongue as was Sandy, though in a different way, for her tongue churned forth only railings and insult, whereas Sandy's music was of a kindlier sort. I knew his story well, and so I knew how to interpret the compassion that was in his face when he bade me farewell. He supposed I was having a bitter hard time of it. Sandy and I discussed his story as we rode along, and she said that Lacote's bad luck had begun with the very beginning of that trip, for the king's fool had overthrown him on the first day, and in such cases it was customary for the girl to desert to the conqueror. But Maledicent didn't do it, and also persisted afterward in sticking to him after all his defeats. But, said I, suppose the victor should decline to accept his spoil. She said that wouldn't answer. He must. He couldn't decline. It wouldn't be regular. I made a note of that. If Sandy's music got to be too burdensome, sometime I would let a knight defeat me on the chance that she would desert to him. In due time we were challenged by the warders from the castle walls, and after a parley admitted. I have nothing pleasant to tell about that visit, but it was not a disappointment, for I knew Mrs. Lefay by reputation, and was not expecting anything pleasant. She was held in awe by the whole realm, for she had made everybody believe she was a great sorceress. All her ways were wicked, all her instincts devilish. She was loaded to the eyelids with cold malice. All her history was black with crime, and among her crimes murder was common. I was most curious to see her, as curious as I could have been to see Satan. To my surprise, she was beautiful. Black thoughts had failed to make her expression repulsive. Age had failed to wrinkle her satin skin or mar its bloomy freshness. She could have passed for old Urdian's granddaughter. She could have been mistaken for sister to her own son. As soon as we were fairly within the castle gates, we were ordered into her presence. King Urdian's was there, a kind-faced old man with a subdued look, and also the son, Sir Twain de Blanchemain, in whom I was, of course, interested on account of the tradition that he had once done battle with 30 knights, and also on account of his trip with Sir Gawain and Sir Marhaus, which Sandy had been aging me with. But Morgan was the main attraction, the conspicuous personality here. She was head chief of this household, that was plain. She caused us to be seated, and then she began, with all manner of pretty graces and graciousnesses, to ask me questions. Dear me, it was like a bird or a flute or something talking. I felt persuaded that this woman must have been misrepresented, lied about. She trilled along, and presently a handsome young page, clothed like the rainbow, and as easily and undulatory of movement as a wave, came with something on a golden salver, and kneeling to present it to her, overdid his graces and lost his balance, and so fell lightly against her knee. She slipped a dirk into him in as matter-of-course a way as another person would have harpooned a rat. Poor child, he slumped to the floor, twisted his silken limbs in one great straining contortion of pain, and was dead. Out of the old king was wrung an involuntary "oh" of compassion. The look he got made him cut it suddenly short and not put any more hyphens in it. Sir Uwaine, at a sign from his mother, went to the anteroom and called some servants, and meanwhile Madame went rippling sweetly along with her talk. I saw that she was a good housekeeper, for while she talked, she kept a corner of her eye on the servants to see that they had made no balks in handling the body and getting it out. When they came with fresh, clean towels, she sent back for the other kind, and when they had finished wiping the floor and were going, she indicated a crimson fleck the size of a tear, which their duller eyes had overlooked. It was plain to me that Lacote Maltail had failed to see the mistress of the house. Often, how louder and clearer than any tongue does dumb circumstantial evidence speak. Morgan Le Fay rippled along as musically as ever. Marvelous woman, and what a glance she had. When it fell in reproof upon those servants, they shrunk and quailed as timid people do when the lightning flashes out of a cloud. I could have got the habit myself. It was the same with that poor old Brer Urdians. He was always on the ragged edge of apprehension. She could not even turn toward him, but he winced. In the midst of the talk, I let drop a complimentary word about King Arthur, forgetting for the moment how this woman hated her brother. That one little compliment was enough. Excuse me. Excuse me, I'm so sorry. She clouded up like a storm. She called for her guards and said, "Hail me these varlets to the dungeons." That struck cold on my ears, for her dungeons had a reputation. Excuse me. Nothing occurred to me to say or do, but not so with Sandy. As the guard laid a hand upon me, she piped up with the tranquilest confidence and said, "God's wounds, dost thou covet destruction, thou maniac? It is the boss." Now what a happy idea that was, and so simple, yet it would never have occurred to me. I was born modest, not all over, but in spots, and this was one of the spots. The effect upon Madame was electrical. It cleared her countenance and brought back her smiles and all her persuasive graces and blandishments. But nevertheless she was not able to entirely cover up with them the fact that she was in a ghastly fright. She said, "La, but do list to thine handmaid," as if one gifted with powers like to mine might say the thing which I have said unto one who has vanquished Merlin, and be not jesting. By mine enchantments I foresaw your coming, and by them I knew you when you entered here. I did but play this little jest with hope to surprise you into some display of your art, as not doubting you would blast the guards with occult fires, consuming them to ashes on the spot, a marvel much beyond mine own ability, yet one which I have long been childishly curious to see. The guards were less curious, and got out as soon as they got permission. We'll stop there and start next time with chapter 17. Thank you for listening. Bye-bye.